typewriter and wrote the most important words in the history of America, and it's all in front of you. And when I teach, I always require that students memorize it because it is the foundation of America. Without the First Amendment, there is no America. That's it. And it's very brief. It's about 37 words long. Put it in your pocket when you go. Thomas Jefferson wrote to Lafayette in 1823, "The only security of all is a free press. The force of public opinion cannot be resisted when permitted to be expressed. The agitation it produces must be submitted to. It is necessary to keep the waters pure." Remember that. The agitation it produces, and good journalism produces agitation. He also said, "Were it left for me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers and newspapers without a government, I would not hesitate for a moment to prefer the latter." I'm not Thomas Jefferson, which is pretty obvious. We've never seen his peer. When it comes to free expression, I have a peculiar interest and a particular qualification to speak today. As Dr. Webb said, in 1960, I was asked by the president of Northwestern State to pack up and leave, but not in those words. Because I expressed myself for about 10 minutes with a picket sign in front of the auditorium protesting the John Birch Society. The president of the university called me into his office the next day and said, "Mr. Strother, you're not happy being here at Northwestern." I said, "No, sir, I'm very happy. I was on a scholarship, track scholarship, didn't have any money at all. I just got married." He said, "Well, we're not happy having you here at Northwestern. We'd like you to be gone by Friday." I was. I packed my few belongings, my new wife, and went to LSU. And I didn't return until Mayor Mercado, Tommy Whitehead called me, and then Dr. Webb and I talked, and after 40 years, I came back. And it's one of the great reunions of my life, and I love this university. It's been meaningful. I'm retired now, but it's something I do. I think it's meaningful, and I'm very proud to be here. But anyway, that's my experience with the president of Northwestern. So I go to LSU, and I'm struggling to survive. So I'm the night man for the Associated Press, and at the same time I'm a student and I'm a senior. And so there was a guy running against Senator Russell Long, and he gave a speech, and I went to cover it, and he lost himself. He got irate, and he started going up and down the aisles, banging his fist in the back of the seat, and screaming that John Kennedy was a communist. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? John Kennedy was a communist, and Russell Long was a fellow traveler. And so I wrote it. It's a story, a great story, with him banging his fist in the back of the seats and all. I think it was an awfully good story, but I got a call from the president of the university next day. "Mr. Strother, would you come to the office?" I said, "Oh, God." Here, I've been there before. And the president was General Troy Middleton, hero of the Battle of the Bulge, one of the great generals at Bastogne, one of the generals that accepted the surrender of the most prominent German general in that fight. A stern man, a man I dearly loved and admired. And he said, "Mr. Strother, I spent the morning with attorneys." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "They are going to file suit, they say, against this university for $25 million. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "But there's some good news." I said, "What's that?" He said, "If I kick you out, they drop the suit." I said, "Oh, here I go again. I can't seem to get ahead." But he said, "You don't want to know what I told him?" I said, "Yeah, I guess." He said, "I told him to go," and he told him to do something that one can't really do to oneself. He looked me in the eye and said, "You go back and write the truth, and you don't worry about it." But I'm not angry with President Kaiser. No, really not. I'm not angry with anybody. But he was only reflecting the attitudes of North Louisiana at that time. What he expected was accepted by most, but it was not acceptable. There were no blacks at Northwestern. Segregation was accepted, but it was not acceptable. When John Lewis was clubbed unconscious and left in a pool of blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama by men on horseback as he exercised his First Amendment rights, it was accepted by most Southerners, but it was not acceptable. Later, John got to be my client. Now, as a man I value above almost all men. Newspaper and television stories and photos of that horrible day in Alabama made the nation uncomfortable. And that's one of the reasons the civil rights legislation was enacted. Horrible stories and photos about the slaughter of our brothers, sons, husbands, friends in Vietnam made people uncomfortable, and the war was brought to a close. In 1911, when stories and photos were published about the 123 women and 23 men between the ages of 16 and 24, mainly immigrants, who jumped to their deaths or burned in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire because the exit doors were locked, it made America uncomfortable, and sweatshop safety laws were passed. Finley Peter Dunn, you all know this phrase, said, "It's the job of newspapers to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable." That mirrors what Thomas Jefferson said. The force of public opinion cannot be resisted when permitted freely to be expressed. The agitation it produces must be submitted to. Because of agitation, we're freer than any time in our history. This is truly a free country. A young person reaching puberty and realizing he or she is gay doesn't have to hide in the shadows. Doesn't have to be refused employment or jailed. That's, as Jefferson said, because of the forces of public opinion. Women are free to demand more money and better positions and refuse to accept second-class citizenship. That's because of the force of public opinion. Jews and African Americans and Latinos are free to buy a house in any neighborhood. That's because of that agitation Thomas Jefferson mentioned. That's the preamble to why I'm so honored to be here today. Like Thomas Jefferson, I believe a free press, and thus journalism, is the most important institution in America. And I believe departments of journalism, schools of journalism, colleges of journalism are the laboratories of democracy. The Current Sauce is such a laboratory. People can go to a local gun shop and buy a pistol. They walk outside and pull the trigger, and they're a shooter. They don't have to have training. They don't have to have education. They don't have to do anything. It takes no skill. Pull the trigger, you're a shooter. But put this in the hands of any young person, and its latent potential is nothing. It's a piece of wood. Without training, without education, without instruction, without reason, without courage, you can't just pull a trigger on this baby. You have to know what you're doing. Young journalists who write for the Sauce make a lot of mistakes, but they're learning to be the thin, thinking line of defense against injustice. They're learning to be the historians of this university. Just look at the 100-year history now available online. That is remarkable. Last night I studied in my room, my hotel room. And first I wanted to see if they had mentioned my being kicked out of the university. It wasn't in there like that. But Tommy Whitehead did a great favor, and plus all the other people who did it, and Dr. Webb is correct. It's just something this university should be terribly proud of. However, across America, journalism training is endangered, and freedom of the press is under constant assault by small-time politicians, ignorance, and corporate ownership of media, where the bottom line is more important than the news value. And it's good campaign politics to attack the press while claiming to be a supporter of the Constitution. I have a little story about a politician who was on the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board as a reporter. Again, wonderful things have reporters, but to be the bottom man of the totem pole means you go to a school board meeting. You have to. And I was the bottom man of the totem pole for the AP. So I went to the school board meeting, and a lady got up and she said, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say something." Recognized her. She said, "I've been reading these books my children bring home." She said, "This fellow Shakespeare, it's immoral." She said, "It's dirty, and I don't want children reading it. I want it taken out of the schools, East Baton Rouge Parish." thought it was a joke. There was this guy who later went to the legislature. He was on the school board, held a used car lot. He said, Mr. Chairman, he said, I ain't never read Shakespeare, and I'm doing pretty damn good. I'm with a lady. And he introduced a resolution to do away with Shakespeare in East Baton Rouge Parish. And it narrowly lost. So, that was long ago. But even today, school boards in Texas are having textbooks rewritten because history disagrees with their strongly held beliefs. I heard an interview on the radio. I was driving through Texas. And this board member of a small school board in Texas said that Thomas Jefferson was given far too much credit. I remember what John Kennedy said when he spoke. He had all the Nobel laureates at the White House sitting at the table, that historic table there. And he said, this is the most intellect to sit at this table since Thomas Jefferson died here alone. Also, when people talk about press bias, they usually mean that facts are being published that disagree with their fundamental beliefs or make them uncomfortable. In Friday's Shreveport Times, it was disheartening. I was writing this speech. In Friday's Shreveport Times was a front page story, an attempt by a Caddo school board member to censor information that comes out of their proceedings. That was in the upper left of the front page this past week. Now, I contend that elected officials do not have that right. If they don't like it, don't run. They're public servants. If I were a reporter there, I'd start turning over rocks to find out what they're trying to hide. That's why we have a free press. And what the school board is trying to do is exactly why the battle for Jefferson's First Amendment can't be relaxed. We have to keep fighting. Yes, we're freer, but it's a constant battle to maintain the freedom. That's why I, as much as I hate to say it, must defend the outrageous political entertainers like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Michael Moore. We must defend their right to fabricate. And I have a quote for you that I found that surprised me a little bit. Journalism classes are being crowded out by the urgency to drill students on core standardized testing subjects. Cash-strapped states and districts are squeezing electives and extracurricular offerings in search of savings. One state, Kansas, nearly stopped financing journalism on the grounds that the profession no longer offers gainful career opportunities. And image-conscious school administrators are removing some of the profession's best teachers in retaliation for student writing that's considered excessively negative or controversial. Those aren't my words. They're the words of the National Council of Teachers of English. The sauce in college newspapers everywhere play an important role in universities. But it's not all serious. It isn't all about saving democracy. Talking to some of the ex-editors here, they all have stories. Part of it's the rich experience of joining other students in a common bond. And the audience are reporters and editors whom I suspect remember their days over a typewriter or computer as the happiest days of their college career. They have unique stories about their mistakes and about their successes. I remember hanging out in the sauce office at night and listening to students talk about their stories, their lives, and then going down to Mad Joe's or Front Street to drink beer in a glow of camaraderie. The sauce was part of my education. When I moved to LSU and later became editor of the Daily Reveille, I met and worked with people who became lifetime friends. People who called in the middle of the night to vent frustration or read me a beautiful poem that happened 2 weeks ago. I don't know if math or engineering students do that. I have no idea. They don't speak my language. My college career would have been a drab place without the stimulation of teachers and other students who truly give a damn. So tonight I salute the present staff and those who went before of the Current Sauce. None of you simply slid or will slide through the required coursework without leaving a trail. All of you make a difference. And in another 100 years or even 10 years, you'll be remembered as recorders of history at Northwestern State University. And I hope you remember yourselves as defenders of all of our rights as Americans.